In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make this awesome modern side table. But first, this video is sponsored by StainPad. All of the parts for this side table were scrap pieces from previous projects. The base is made up of 3/4 of an inch thick mahogany pieces, and the top is 3/4 of an inch curly cherry. The material for the top is just beautiful. It has some amazing figure throughout the boards. I'm starting the build process by gluing up the top since it'll need to set in clamps for several hours before I can work with it. So to begin, I'm cleaning up the rough edges at the table saw. Before I glue up the boards, I'll first start by putting the pieces in the clamps and doing a trial run. With glue on the edges, I clamp them up and wipe away the glue squeeze out with a damp cloth. I can set the top to the side to dry. Now we can start working on the base. I start by cutting the pieces to a width of 2 1/4 inches. There are a total of 6 aprons and 3 legs that make up the base. Since the aprons are only 10 inches long, I was able to get multiple aprons out of a single board. So next, I change the stop block in my miter gauge to 20 3/4 of an inch for the 3 longer pieces that I'm calling the legs. The length of the aprons and the legs exclude any additional length for the joinery because I'm using dowels for the joinery. I'm putting 2 dowels on each end of the leg to connect the leg to the aprons. I'm using 3/8 of an inch dowels, and I'm placing them roughly 3/4 of an inch away from the edge. I make a mark on both sides of the leg and then very carefully transfer the mark to the aprons. To use the doweling jig, I place it over the end of the leg and then line up the center line of the jig with the mark on the board, as you can see here. The dowels are 2 inches long, so to make a mark for 1 inch, I place the bit in the hole and then place a piece of tape 1 inch up from the bottom of the bit. With the bit marked, I drill the first hole. I then slide the jig over and drill the remaining hole. The doweling jig is perfect for projects like this. A few marks, a cheap jig, and you have really strong joinery that you can use on a wide range of projects, from rails and style doors to tables like this. Before I glue up the leg components, I like to cut the angles on the ends so that I can join the base. I tilt the blade to 60 degrees and then make a test cut. Always make test cuts so that you don't have to waste time and material. Since the aprons are already cut to their final lengths, I only need to remove enough material to put the angle on the end of the workpiece. Before leaving the table saw, I need to do 2 more things. The first is to make a scrap piece with the same angle cut on the end of it. This piece will be helpful when we're assembling the base here in just a minute. The second thing is to take the bevel gauge and then set it to the same angle as the blade as well. This will be used to assist in marking the aprons for pre-drilling the screws. I assemble the base and position it so that the inside of the miters are 1 1/2 inches back from one another, as you can see here. Next, I make 2 marks on each board to indicate the thickness of the adjoining apron for pre-drilling. And using that bevel gauge, I scribe a line on the edge of each apron so that I know where the center of the adjoining board is. This video helps explain this a little better, as you can see here. The placement of the screws is tricky since they need to be centered on an angle. So this is where that scrap piece comes into play. I begin drilling the hole with a 3/8 inch Forstner bit to create the countersink, and then I switch over to using a 5/16 to pre-drill for the screw. Before gluing up the leg components, now's the perfect time to clean up the edges. I like to hand plane my edges, so I grab my smoothing plane and then made a few passes to remove any blade marks. The glue ups for this project can't get any easier. I put glue in the holes on the aprons and the legs, and then tap the dowels into place. All that's left to do is to put the components together and then place it in a clamp for a few hours to dry. To mount the base to the top, I need to route a groove on the inside of the top aprons for the tabletop fasteners. The slot will go into the face of the aprons that has the plugs on them. I make a mark halfway between the plug and the edge of the leg and then carry that line around to the opposite face because this is the face that you're going to see when you're routing it at the router table. I installed an 1/8 inch router bit and set its height, and then made a mark on the left and the right side of my bit on the fence. This is going to tell me where to start and stop the routing for the groove. I slowly plunge down and then make a pass. I repeat these same steps for the other 2 leg components. We have one final step before assembling the base, and that is to sand the surfaces. Since I'm dyeing the base, I sand with 120 grit and then stop at 150 grit. The finer grit you sand to, the less the dye is absorbed into the surface, so I stopped at 150. With the surface sanded, I assembled the base by first pre-drilling onto the end grain of the aprons. So I placed the piece back together in the same location that I marked earlier, and then with some tape on the surface, I make the same marks as before. Next, using an 1/8 inch drill bit, I place it in the hole and then make a mark to indicate where I need to drill. I take it over to my workbench and very carefully pre-drill the holes. Now all I have to do is install the screws, and it's easier to screw them in a little at a time and then make your way around the base. After a few minutes, the base is assembled and ready for plugs. Using a 3/8 of an inch plug cutter and some scrap mahogany, I drilled several plugs for the top and bottom aprons of the base. I needed a total of 12, but I always make up a few extra to have on hand just in case I lose one. Next, I used the bandsaw to cut them free. All that's left to do is to apply a little bit of glue in the holes and then hammer in the plugs. Pay attention to the grain direction of the plugs and the aprons to make sure that they match. Even though I dyed the base, you can still see the grain. After the glue dried, I used my flush cut saw to remove the excess plugs and then sanded the surface again with 150 to smooth everything out. With the base down, I can focus on making the top round. I begin by taping the top down to a big piece of MDF using double-sided carpet tape. This will hold it in place while I use the router. Next, I use a straight edge to make a mark from corner to corner, as this will show me the center of the panel. I'm using a circle cutting router jig, and it pivots off of an 1/8 inch steel pin. And using an 1/8 inch drill bit, I drill down a 1/2 inch in the center of the top, and this is on the bottom side of the top. Next, I place the router jig on the top and then put the steel pin in the slot for 20 inches and begin routing. I lower the bit down 1/4 of an inch at a time until I route all the way through the 3/4 of an inch top. The base is dyed black using an India ink, and for the applicator, I'm using a stain pad, the sponsor of today's video. The pad has a foam core so it holds plenty of stain or dye, and with the outside of the applicator being a microfiber cloth, it lays down a really smooth coat. And since it's a loopless material, you can use it almost snag-free on materials like rough sawn or reclaimed lumber. Not only can you use it for applying your stain or dye, but you can also use it to apply your top coat. One of the coolest features of the stain pad is that you can cut it to any size that you want. It comes in 2 6x8 sheets, so if you're using it on a smaller project, you just cut what you need. I'll leave a link to this product in the description below. After 4 coats of varnish on the top and 3 on the base, the top is ready to be attached. I center the base on the bottom side of the top and then install the screws. And with that, the project was done. I hope you enjoyed watching me build this modern side table. It's a project that's simple enough for any woodworker or DIYer to knock out in just a couple of days. I love the curly cherry top, and the contrasting base really makes it stand out. I'm sure my mom's going to love using this table for a nice plant stand. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment below and hit that like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, don't forget to do that as well. If you want to see more of the behind the scenes stuff that I have going on in between projects, check me out on Instagram at SimpleCove. Thanks for watching.